The third review for Kamen Rider April has arrived. Kamen Rider Den-O. Before I started watching Kamen Rider, I've seen so many clips of the season through memes. And as I watched through Gaim, I learned about how good the season was, so I decided to watch it next. And did it live up to the hype? Well, let's find out. As I had mentioned in the other two reviews, Den-O was quite the departure for the structure of Kamen Rider, as this is when they decided to employ the 2-episode structure for their story, and it paid off heavily for Toei, seeing as how they never stopped doing this for Kamen Rider until Gaim came around. Now, I mentioned before that I'm fine with using this kind of structure as long as the show is paced properly, and while Den-O isn't as well paced as O's, it was still fine. It felt like it was fine to use the structure for the story being told here. So yeah, the main premise for Den-O, Ryotaro Nogami gets hooked into becoming a Kamen Rider once an Imagine, the season's gaggle of enemies, possess him. The Imagine grant the wish of any person, and when that wish is granted, they can travel back in time to cause havoc and wreck the flow of time. Although much to this specific Imagine's dismay, Ryotaro is a singularity point, meaning that this Imagine can't take a physical form to destroy time. What a singularity point is will be explained later, as the show also does the same. As he is found to be a singularity point, a girl named Hana pretty much forces him to become Kamen Rider Den-O to protect the flow of time. Although he'll need help from the Imagine possessing him, as Ryotaro himself is a giant pussy. So yeah, time travel. It's involved within the story, and while that tends to lead to the stories having a ton of plot holes, Den-O doesn't really have that, for the most part. Mainly because the story takes a backseat for a long while. O's is much the same in this regard, although I feel like O's takes less time to get into the heat of things. Not like I dislike this aspect of Den-O all that much, as the episodes focus more on developing our cast of colorful characters and setting up plot points for later. It is odd to see how long it takes to really get the plot going. So at least most of this review won't just be the story like with the Gaim, so that's a plus, right? As the show goes on, it keeps on building up mysteries, such as the mystery man in a trench coat that is always found in the past once an Imagine starts wrecking time, Ryotaro's sister who seems to have suffered amnesia and suddenly starts freezing up when she sees the telescope in her cafe. Once Ryotaro gets himself 3 other Imagine possessing him, the last one has a ticket for the Denliner, which is a train used to travel through time. There are a lot of mysteries here to be solved. My issue is how long most of these take to be answered, but that's for later. Let us move on to the characters for the show, as that's the most focus on element. Sanjou! Here we have yet another great main rider. He starts off pretty annoying though, not gonna lie. The clumsy dude act is always something I don't like seeing from main characters, as they tend to just use the same jokes with him constantly. Although in Ryotaro's case, they don't use his clumsiness for jokes all that often. And thanks to the Imagine needing to possess him when he fights, we don't see those traits used during those. Although there are times when he'll fight on his own when they want to develop him more. While I think the other 2 writers we've seen are better developed during the story, Ryotaro's arc is still nice to see. Going from a clumsy fuck to someone who with a lot more confidence in himself is nice to see. His interactions with the cast are also just great overall, especially with the first Imagine that possesses him, Momotaros. He's one of the most popular writers, which also explains why he's in so many fucking movies, and I can easily see why. He's my 5th favorite writer. Now for the supporting cast. As mentioned before, character interactions are the bigger focus for the season, and they succeeded in that regard. I love the cast for this season. It's easily my favorite. Hana is a fan favorite character, and I can easily see why. She plays off really well with the Imagine and Ryotaro, helping them all grow as characters, and even grows a bit herself thanks to her hatred of Imagine being lessened thanks to Kintaro's. This hatred at first was thanks to the Imagine destroying her timeline. One thing I see as weird for the season in regards to her is how she isn't able to transform into Den-O. We learn she is also a singularity point, so why was she looking for someone to be Den-O in the first place? It's really odd. Hell, it could have helped with developing Ryotaro. Think of it like Akira and Shintaro. She could help train him, and they could just have her be injured later on in the season to get Ryotaro to stick to being Den-O. This point doesn't really make her worse by any stretch. It's just weird that she just didn't try to become Den-O. The owner of the Denliner, he doesn't have a name, he's just owner, is the worst of the cast for sure. He has 2 things going for him: eating food with a flat sticking out of it and trying not to topple it over, and exposition. Both happen at once in nearly every episode and nothing else. Doesn't have any interesting interactions with anyone outside of Hana and Ryotaro, as that's who he's expositing to. I'm fine with exposition, but when your entire character is basically just this, then you aren't that much of a character. Naomi the stewardess. She's a very fun character. A lot of the humor in the Denliner comes from her and the Imagine, and for the most part the jokes land. So sure, she isn't much of a character, but at least she's having fun. Then we have the biggest part of my enjoyment of the supporting cast, the Imagine. The four Imagine that possess Ryotaro are all great parts of the show, Momotaro's being my favorite. Not only is he great for helping develop Ryotaro later in the show, his interactions with everyone else are just fun as hell. His mannerisms are also just great. Hell, this clip I'm showing you now is my first exposure to Kamen Rider. I'm not joking about that. I'm really not. Urataros is also very fun. He's the slimy douchebag of the group, using Ryutaro's body to manipulate anyone he comes across. His interactions with the cast is great, although when it comes to development, he has virtually none. Just one scene and that's it. But that doesn't matter too much for me. He isn't a character I expect to develop much. Kintaros is the tough and kind dude, helping Ryutaro with training later on. His introduction was also great, as he was an Imagine that possessed someone to get them to help someone reconnect. It was such a nice episode overall. Ryutaro is easily the worst of the Imagine. As for most of the show, he's just a brat. He does at least develop a bit and actually becomes a bit more mature, but for the most part, I didn't really like him. Although I did like how he interacted with the other Imagine, which is the true strength of these characters. Seeing how they all bounce off each other. There are other supporting characters, and by that I mean really just one, but I'll save her for the spoiler section. Here we have the star of the show, easily the best character this season, Yuto Sakurai, and it's played by one of my favorite actors, Yuichi Nakamura, who is motherfucking Bruno Bucciolati. Editor's note, by that I mean me, I fucking hate life. It's the wrong one. There is Yuichi Nakamura, who voices Bruno Bucciolati, and Yuichi Nakamura, who voices Yuto. Japan, ladies and gentlemen. At first, he's the normal kind of secondary rider, butting heads with Ryutaro for a bit, but then eventually gets along with him. His interactions with his imagined companion Deneb is also just very wholesome. Deneb trying at every turn to get Yuto friends to the point where he possessed him for a night and got him some friends. Although thanks to the weird circumstances of him being in this timeline, he can't fight too often, as once he runs out of Zero Nose cards, he will no longer be able to fight and save his destroyed timeline, as well as be forgotten by anyone who isn't a singularity point. Although during the story he is able to find a way to use his rider form without needing a Zero Nose card, although that leads to another issue. Instead of only having everyone forget his existence after using all the Zero Nose cards, one card is now enough to have everyone forget him, which can lead to quite a few gut punches. Like that episode of Yuto getting friends with through Deneb, a girl ends up falling in love with him, and you can tell what happens with that. He's a very tragic character overall, and also has the most story prevalence compared to everyone else. There, of course, is one other aspect of him, but that involves story spoilers, so more on that later. Overall, for my ranking of him, he's also my 5th favorite secondary rider. Much like with Ryotaros' ranking, I just prefer 4 other riders compared to him, although the rankings are very close in this case especially. Now, here we have quite the unpopular opinion. I could care less for the OST. Not that I don't like some songs, Action Zero is a fantastic battle theme for Yuto, Double Action is great too, although I can only ever remember how the Momotaro's version of it sounds like, and both versions of the opening are just fantastic. I can't really put my finger on why I don't like the OST as much, I guess I just can't remember how a lot of the songs sound like. This ranking might change in the future if I try to go back and listen to the OST more, but I doubt it will change. Editor's note. Again, it won't change. My feelings about the OST are still the same even after listening to most of the songs. Double Action Rod Form has a nice instrumental to it though, at least. It is my 11th favorite OST. For the openings though, Climax Jump, Den-O, and Denliner Form are both such great songs. They get you super pumped up for the season, and the Denliner variant is especially great, as they use the voice actors for the Taros Imagines, and gives the song much more enjoyment for me. Minus the rap part with Ryotaros. Oh yeah, I need to mention this. Seasons with more than one opening are ranked together, even if they are different songs, like with Kamen Rider Blade and Hibiki. It is my 4th favorite opening, and the Denliner version of the song is my 8th favorite song overall. Now for those who decided to see the spoiler section and haven't watched the show, remember when I said that it takes a while to get the actual plot going? Well, believe it or not, episode 31 is when it gets going. Yes, it takes that fucking long. While I'm fine with the season, it's a bit unforgivable to just not have a plot for that long. It sets up things all the way in the beginning, and although one mystery that is set up that doesn't happen right away is at episode 17. When we find out that the strange dude with the watch is Yuto Sakurai, which was before Zero No showed up, by the way. Although there was actually one specific reason it takes this long to set up the main plot, using 5 fucking episodes to set up a movie. Honestly, why did the stuff with Gao have to be a movie? It didn't need to be the endgame for Den-O, but it would help the middle part of the show that is void of any kind of plot. I hate using episodes in the show itself to set up for a movie. I'd rather the movie take place after the show is done or is some kind of alternate reality. Or hell, have everyone forget it happened, which they did decide to do, although it was only Ryotaro who forgot it. Have yet to watch the Gao movie itself to confirm why he's the only one like that despite being a singularity point, so please tell me in the comments why this happened, or I guess I'll just wait to watch the movie. Like sure, Gaim did an episode to set up a movie, keyword being 1, although technically it would be 2, but that's for Kikaider. And I didn't like that either, but it didn't shit on the pacing of the show in the process. Rant aside, the 2 episodes with Sieg did set up development for Ryotaro, so it did something right at least. If the contract holder forgets your existence, you'll disappear, and thanks to that Gao movie, Urutaros, Kintaros, and Ryotaros are forgotten about by Ryotaro and begin to disappear, although some horseshit decides to happen. Through the power of friendship, not even joking, he then gets a phone that can contact the other 3 Imagine to transform with him, which turns himself into an admittedly cool form. Seriously, Climax form is fucking awesome, and no, this isn't a final form. Like, the bullshit I see with people claiming Tajidor as a final form is one thing, but this one makes even less sense to call a final form. But whatever, who cares about that now? Through this weird event that is probably explained more thoroughly in the movie, the other 3 Imagine can stay on the Denliner with Ryotaro and the gang. So after this event, Yuto starts running out of cards, and this is when the plot starts to get going. As Yuto was using up the cards, we find out that with each card used, it takes away memories of him from people, as the supplier of these cards is the older Yuto, whose memories are being sacrificed for these missions. This older Yuto was engaged to Ryotaro's sister Airi, but after an event shown later, her memories were locked away, with her only hint to his existence being the telescope in the cafe. As a man from her past shows up to get engaged with her, he signs a contract with an Imagine, and it leads to Airi getting kidnapped. She starts to remember who Yuto is, but before she can confirm this, Yuto has to transform into Zeronos to save Ryotaro, and as this happens, Yuto's existence is erased from Airi's memory, along with the asshat who kidnapped her. Fucking Yuto, man, this was the first giant gut punch from him in this season, and as explained before, this isn't the last. After this event, as the Denliner comes to a stop, the gang notice a weird hole with train tracks coming out of it. After that, we cut to some little girl just like Hana, and yep, she got turned into a little girl now. So I mentioned before how it was weird she couldn't turn into Den-O despite being a singularity point. Well, this plot point could have helped her stop being Den-O. But then I remembered, in a movie, there are kids who can turn into Den-O, so, yeah. After a few episodes, the old Yuto returns and gives Zeronos more cards. Gonna just differentiate them like this now. Although at first he is denied thanks to Deneb, not wanting more people to forget he exists, eventually Zeronos is back into the action. Ryotaro, not wanting to see Yuto being forgotten by more people, takes the cards away, and during this time as well, something seems off with the Imagine. Kintaro's noticed how during the last fight he wasn't able to fight together properly as Den-O, and as Ryotaro begs Airi to remember the telescope, more Imagine are on the fray, and suddenly Ryotaro isn't able to transform with the Taros. They then figure out a plan to get them to transform with him. They create a weapon that they can use to communicate with Ryotaro, and with this, liner form is created. Liner form, a fan favorite final form and for a good reason. The design is very slick and looks like an evolution for the base form, and it helps with developing Ryotaro's character as he has to fight with his own strength and use the Imagine as an extension of that power. A very thematic final form, but it gets ruined thanks to one stupid aspect of it. The entire point of it gets undermined 2 episodes after it is introduced, as Ryotaro is able to go back to using the other forms with no issues, although they pull some bullshit about being able to use the other forms in the past, despite the issue of not transforming happening there. Why they set up this form to be what Ryotaro needs to transform to then just pussy out is such a stupid move. As a result, the form gets ranked a lot lower than it would have if it stayed as Den-O's permanent form for the rest of the season. For the movies and cameos, for the most part, Momotaros assumes the role of Den-O. It honestly would have been top 3 material, but thanks to that snag, it is now ranked as my 7th favorite final form. With those weird tracks growing, more weird things start happening. Ryotaro suddenly starts hearing someone talk to him, who tells him to kill Ryotaro, as that was the original plan for Ryotaro's. But as he doesn't want to do the job anymore, his boss finally decides to confront him. So here we have Kai, our villain for this season. Yeah, it took 37 episodes to get a villain, and oh boy, is he majorly underwhelming. But more on that later. Ryotaro, after trying to fight Kai, ends up teaming up with him for a bit to get back at Zeronos for getting all of Irie's attention. And this plan involves having Ryotaro sneaking on the Zero Liner, Zeronos' train, and putting in a special car to fuck with it, causing it to continuously move in order for them to crash both liner trains and get them all stuck in the sands of time. As this happens, the Denliner crew, while talking to the station master, learns that the weird hole is called a junction point, and that they will only know what time that leads to once the tracks connect. Oh yeah, and the station master looks like the owner of the Denliner. Why? I actually don't even fucking know. As they stop the Denliner and Zero Liner from crashing, Ryotaro and Zeronos confront Kai, and then something odd happens. Kai looks into a book, sees a date, and is able to open himself up for his imagined minion to jump into. In the next episode, after Kai goads Ryotaro into traveling into the past to chase after another Imagine, we find a much younger Yuto, and during this, the telescope that he'd give Irie is destroyed, and with that, Yuto disappears from time, as this was before he got his contract with Deneb. Thanks to this, once Ryotaro returns to the present, Deneb was with him on the Denliner. As in this timeline, Deneb possessed Ryotaro. As Ryotaro sees how life is like if Irie never met Yuto, he sees how happy her life has become, although is still unable to accept this outcome as Yuto should be allowed to exist. Then as he confronts Kai, thanks to the memories of Zeronos fighting in the present, Yuto is back, and with a new set of cards along with red cards, as I explained before, erase the memories of people that meet him after only one card instead of the slower process with the green and yellow cards. The yellow cards let him fuse with Deneb, doesn't really affect anything else. After 2 episodes of that gut punch with Yuto mentioned way earlier, Kai confronts Ryotaro again and tells him how if he were to be beaten, then the Imagine would all disappear, which causes Ryotaro to want to fight on his own from now on, as he doesn't want them to die fighting with him. This leads to an amazing confrontation between Momotaros and Ryotaro, and the two are able to reconcile with each other and go down fighting together. After this, Ryotaro tries to go back in time to see what happened on the day Irie lost her memory to try and see why nobody can recall what happened. As he goes to the beach where this happens, he sees Zeronos fighting, but then the actual Zeronos isn't transformed yet, and is watching the scene unfold. We see that Kai is also there and then summons a giant hole in the sky and proceeds to destroy the beach. The timeline with Irie and Yuto being engaged was the destroyed timeline Zeronos came from, and since Ryotaro is a singularity point, he remembered that event happening while everyone else didn't. Although why Ryotaro doesn't remember the timeline being destroyed is the next question. During this time, Kai is also trying to figure out the way to get to the junction point, as he thought Yuto was the answer to that question. Kai, once confronting Ryotaro and Zeronos again, realizes who the key to the junction point is. Irie. Yuto was trying to hide this fact, hence why he showed up in the past all the times the Imagine went back, which is something really cool in my eyes, connects even the early non-plot related episodes into this. As that lion Imagine we always see with Kai goes back to find Irie, Zeronos and Ryotaro fight him, but are overpowered by it. Then Yuto shows up and transforms and takes care of this guy once and for all. Because I didn't mention it until now, that lion Imagine is voiced by Takaya Kuroda. He also voiced another random Imagine, but hey, cool hearing his voice more. I fucking love him. Also, before anyone asks, yes, Majima's voice actor Hidenari Ugaki also voices someone in Kamen Rider, but that's for another time. As the Imagine is destroyed, the past Irie somehow knows all about Deno and Zeronos, as she spotted the Zero Liner before. She talks about how the junction point needs to connect to protect all of time, and asks Zeronos to send her back to the lake so she could lose her memories again. Now we are at the end game, so not much left to talk about. Kai finally mounts his full plan, get as many Imagine as possible and separate Zeronos and Deno from each other to get to Irie. As this happens, Kintaro separates from Ryotaro in order to buy him time, as all the Taros are slowly starting to disappear. As Kai finally gets to Irie to go to the past, Urotaros finds some stowaways on the Denliner and works together with them to blow up the Denliner. As the gang are kicked out of the Denliner, they end up back in the past and run into Irie in the past Ryotaro, and that missing memory of the past he had has been found. He finds that he was forced to become Deno in this timeline and that before the events of Kai, he was to protect Irie's baby from the Imagine. His memory was messed with thanks to Yuto using a Zero Nose card to have him forget everything, hence why he was fighting at the beach. Although how that works is beyond me. Ryotaro is a singularity point. How would his memories be affected by this? This, along with the liner form stuff, is what I meant with the plot holes. Although in the case of this point, it does actively fuck with the story, as Ryotaro forgetting the events of that day is the entire reason why he doesn't know who the key to the junction point is. Although with this revelation, he's able to figure out who that baby was. Then Urotaros confronts them again, although this time he holds back the Imagine on the Denliner, as he had a change of heart and wants to protect Ryotaro. During this time, Kai summons one last Imagine that overpowers Zeranos completely, and Kai prepares his attempt to destroy this timeline as he is fed up with trying to find the junction point, as it ended up not being Irie. During this battle, we then are told that Hana was the junction point, so yeah, Hana is Ryotaro's niece. Then as all of the Taros fight with Ryotaro and Zeranos to stop this final attack, Sieg is suddenly back. I'm guessing the Gao movie explains this, so I won't say anything. Then, very anticlimactically, seriously, this final battle was really fucking lame. Kai is defeated along with that strong Imagine, and seemingly all the Taros and Imagine are destroyed. Although, of course not, because their memories will cause them all to live on anyways. So what the fuck was the point of setting up this shit of them disappearing if it didn't matter? Whatever, that's it for the story. Everyone lives happily ever after, the fucking end. Man, this was a bit of a roller coaster. There was a lot I liked about the plot here, really, but there were points that just felt forced and contrived. Shit with the liner form, Ryotaro's memory, and this last bit just set me off. But overall, the story was fine. The strength came from the characters overall, as mentioned before, but like, fuck, can it kill them to just pace this much better? Most of this plot came at episode 37. I understand needing to set up stuff, but taking this long to get to it is just not the way to do it. Also, Kai's such a boring villain overall. That's also why you don't introduce the villain so late into the season and not give him much to do besides act like some weirdo. So this ended up being much longer than O's, although that tends to happen with me ranting about something, so you'll expect certain seasons to end up this way as well. Overall, where would I rank this season? As you can tell, I don't rate this anywhere close to the previous two. Not that this season is bad, it was just quite the downgrade to me. And well, it's only going to go downhill from here, at least for this month. The characters overall save for this season for me, although the rank would stay the same for me. It is my 7th favorite Kamen Rider season. I get why people like the season so much, but it's definitely not for the story, I can tell you that much. So what's next for Kamen Rider April, you may ask? Well... That's right, Kamen Rider Double, another fan favorite season, and as you could tell from what I said before, it only gets worse from here. As if I haven't made enough enemies with this review, the next one's gonna be the end of me. So as I write my will, hopefully you'll at least wait until the 5th review is done before setting me ablaze. So see you guys next Saturday for Kamen Rider Double.